Welcome to a special offering by Conversations with a Wounded Healer, the Burnt Out Practice Owner. This series will discuss the current state of group practice ownership, the good, the bad, and the ugly. We'll hear current and former practice owners' tales of glory and woe as we attempt to answer the ultimate question, why do we do this to ourselves? And we want to hear from you too. What have been your biggest moments of struggle or triumph? What are questions you want us to explore? I'm your host, Sarah Bueno. I owned and operated my practice, Head Heart Therapy, for 10 years before selling in 2023. Ownership was an equally grueling and rewarding experience for me, and I now spend my time helping current practice owners find balance for themselves. Join us between releases of Conversations with a Wounded Healer for this special series. Hello again. I'm so excited to be here with you. Thank you for hanging out with me on the Burnt Out Practice Owner. Today, we are talking to a practice owner, but not a group practice owner. We're talking to somebody who has worked at every level of care in mental health. And so he has a literal 360 bird's eye view of the whole situation. And we get into some really interesting topics in this episode. So before I introduce you to our guest, a couple ways you can support the podcast if you want. As always, you can rate and review the podcast on Apple Podcast, or you can go to ratethispodcast.com/woundedhealer, which, if you didn't know, this series is embedded in my longtime podcast, Conversations with a Wounded Healer. So rating and reviewing actually helps people decide if they think we're cool or not. And I definitely want to be one of the cool kids. So please help me out with that. You can also share this podcast. One of the hidden agendas in this podcast, so I should probably change the intro at some point, but one of my hidden agendas is I really want to help group practices and employees kind of like be friends again. There's been this big divide, and I think that through this podcast, we have the capacity to do some healing work, to bring people together, to see if we can't make more equitable, livable, awesome, amazing workspaces. And then lastly, if you are a group practice owner and you're like, holy shit, I like what this chick has to say, you can hire me. I am consulting with group practice owners right now, and it has been a ton of fun, actually. That's how you can support me. Now let's hear about today's guest and all of the wisdom that Aaron is going to share with us. So today we're talking to Aaron Karmin, who's an LCPC and a Gottman Certified 7 Principles Educator, and he also holds advanced certification in stress management. He's the author of Instant Anger Management and the Anger Management Workbook for Men, and he's worked at every level of mental health care. Aaron's approach focuses on identifying physical cues, recognizing thoughts, considering consequences, implementing solutions, choosing behaviors, and promoting expression. So please enjoy this really riveting conversation with Aaron Karmin. Hey there, therapist. How you doing? If you're like a lot of people out there, maybe you need a little bit more support than usual. Well, I've got you covered. I'm currently running 2 groups that I plan to run again in the fall of 2024. So add your name to the wait list to be notified as soon as info is available. First is the Burnt Out Practice Owner Support Group for group therapy practice owners. We'll focus on the emotional component of business ownership while building trust and connection with other practice owners. We'll explore topics such as boundary setting, feeling underappreciated, overwork, and find ways to reconnect with our agency. And you'll also have the support of other practice owners when challenges arise within your business. Next is the Authentic Leaders Group. It's here to help you become the authentic and wholehearted leader you aspire to be. Join me on an 8-month journey of self-discovery and leadership mastery, where you'll enhance your leadership skills and forge meaningful connections with fellow therapists who are committed to their own growth and the betterment of the therapy field. For the Burnt Out Practice Owner waitlist, go to www.headheartbiztherapy.com/burnt-out. Make sure you've got the T and BURNTOUT. And next is the Authentic Leaders Group waitlist at www.headheartbiztherapy.com/authentic-leaders-group. Hope to see you soon. Hello, Aaron. Welcome to the Burnt Out Practice Owner.
Hello. Happy Saturday.
And the sun is shining. So for us, it's a good day. Who knows what happens when people are listening to this, but for right now, I'll take it.
Little wins.
Yes, exactly. So why don't you introduce yourself to folks?
Well, my name's Aaron Karmin. I'm a licensed clinical professional counselor. I'm currently working at my own practice called Karmin Counseling. Let's see, I've written a few books on anger management. One's called Instant Anger Management. The other one's called the Anger Management Workbook for Men. Originally from Buffalo, New York, moved to Chicago in 2000, came here for grad school, chose Roosevelt University because Roosevelt has a stress institute in addition to the clinical psych program. So I got this advanced certification in stress management. And that just means I'm certified to teach yoga, meditation, imagery, progressive muscle relaxation, breathing exercise.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, different kind of self-care tools.
Yeah.
And then I went out to work at some hospitals, worked at St. Anthony's Hospital over in Douglas Park and Swedish Covenant Hospital on the Northwest side, inpatient, partial hospitalization, intensive outpatient levels of care. Then I worked over in Garfield Park. That was more community mental health. So kind of helping the chronic mental in the community, helping the unhoused population, people coming out of the Department of Corrections. At that point, I did kind of a 180. I started working at ComPsych EAP.
Oh.
So I worked there for about 12 years. And I worked in their research department. I worked in their intake department. I was a phone counselor back in before telehealth was even a reality. It was really on the phone. And then I was a manager of their intake department. While I was doing that, I was working at private practice. I worked at a private practice called Urban Balance and a different private practice called the Anger Clinic before that. I went to California for a while. I worked at a therapeutic boarding school with teenagers, an experiential model. You take these like 15-year-olds like whitewater rafting and rock climbing and, use the natural environment to empower them. I came back and I was still working private practice work. I worked at Illinois Mental Health Collaborative, which is a lot of care review dynamics. And then I've just been doing private practice full time for the past 8 years. And so it's really been a journey watching, all the different kind of elements that happened in a private practice over that length of time, even without COVID, which was, of course, a huge transformative experience. But I think just, being in that kind of, I don't know, all those different levels of care, you see things from different sides. You see it from the biller side, you see it from the provider side, you see it from different funding sources, whether it's EAP, insurance, public aid benefits. And so I think like all of, those experiences, my goal was to kind of work at every level of care. And that would help me ascertain, if somebody is at a 2 or a 10, how intense their symptomatology is and making sure that I can provide the most appropriate level of clinical service.
I am in total agreement with you on that. And I didn't work at every level of care, but got several different levels of care. And the experience that I got in those jobs prior to private practice, I would not have been prepared for private practice.
Absolutely. I think, it's a lot of, you can read a book on swimming, but like once you're in the pool, it's a different experience. And so, so much of therapy is like you can read about it, but like if you're not working with someone has a severe psychosis versus somebody who you're doing short-term, brief solution EAP work and knowing how to kind of tailor your approach to different populations, it's not something you can read about. I think you have to have that experience.
Right. Well, I guess first let me ask the question, what's your thought or your feeling or your judgment on the new trend that we have where people are going straight from grad school into private practice?
I think it's stifling, because I think, being able to have that, again, that 1 to 10 scale, it's not like an on-off switch that either you're depressed or you're not depressed. I think there's different degrees and scales and scope of what those symptoms look like. I think it helps to have people who are more severe and acute to then have not to minimize private practice work, but somebody who maybe is less, it's more of a chronic issue. It's like less a crisis intervention. And so I think like it's just different clinical skills because you're going to work with people in private practice who have an episodic experience where they are in crisis.
Yes.
And if you don't have that background, it's like,
yes,
you're not really going to have a safety net. Like you're not going to know. And I've seen this, I've done supervision with grad students for maybe like over 15 years while I was at ComPsych in private practice. And I've seen people freeze, like literally like, kind of get up in the session, come get somebody, like they don't know what to do.
Right.
And, that's always the strength and liability of private practice. It's great because you're independent and you struggle because you're independent.
Precisely.
And so if you don't have that confidence to work independently and to have the experience and those tools to work with people who maybe are having a crisis episode or their symptoms are escalating, their substance abuse that is getting out of hand, then you're kind of stuck and there isn't really a life preserver in those moments because you're sitting in an office or you're kind of, alone in your own home doing teletherapy.
Yeah. Amen. And you're preaching to the choir right now. So let's get into the stuff that maybe some of the group practice owners haven't thought about or heard about. So before we started recording, I had asked, because you worked at Urban Balance for quite a bit of time, and Urban Balance went through a lot of different iterations of itself. And then Joyce sold it to Refresh Mental Health. Is that right? And it became a really large organization. So I'm really, really curious from the employee's standpoint, what was that like for you to go through all of the changes?
It's interesting because I always say, like, as clinicians, we get a lot of education, but we don't learn about the business side of things. I never took a business class. And so, you don't learn how to do CPT codes and negotiate rates. And, all of that is kind of on the fly. And so part of watching all of that transformation from it being owned by Joyce and a colleague to Joyce buying out the colleague to Urban Balance then being a small private practice that had like 3 locations, had 6 locations, and ultimately had like 20 some odd locations, one in Illinois, one in Missouri, one in Kentucky, Colorado, and spread across all these, Texas even, and managing clinicians in other states and being able to align billing services and what the requirements are, and then seeing it get sold to Refresh Mental Health, which is a venture capital backed company. And what Refresh did was go around and buy a lot of group practices and then bundle them and sell them to Optum. And so now Urban Balance is owned by, they deny 90837s. There's political, there's politics there. There's litigation with Optum. They're my least of the, I don't know, I'm going to speak ill of Optum, but they're my least favorite. Yeah, they're, I don't know, the rigidity of Optum. But more, so then Optum ultimately bought it from Refresh. So they bought all these group practices, including Urban Balance. And so now they are owned by Optum because that is kind of I think the larger way of mental health care is like small private practices are kind of going the way of the dodo because they are these venture capitalism. They're buying and selling and bundling. And then like Optum will say, hey, Walmart, we can have therapists available for all of your employees on call whenever you need them. As a clinician, it feels very different.
Yep.
And so I think, like, to your question, my experience has been all over that place because you see that what happens is the administrative side gets much more cumbersome.
Yeah.
You see the billing side gets wonky. The credentialing side becomes impossible. You see all of these functions that were going smooth when it was a smaller practice. And then it's like something gets broken because the metaphor that was given to me was like, well, you got to fly the plane and build the plane at the same time. And that sounds like you're going to crash. But, I'm not in aerospace. So that was kind of like the idea is we're figuring it out as we go along. And so much of that creates instability. And, fundamentally, whether you're on the client side or your therapist side, you don't mess with people's money. And when you're undermining that kind of financial stability of your clinicians, and a lot of clinicians have other jobs or they have, supplemental income from spouse. And so like they're relying on X amount of dollars paid in Y amount of time. And everything gets lost because the timeline to get reimbursed changes. The revenue stream starts to change because of the billing procedures. And so everything became like thrown up in the air. Because, when I started Urban Balance, it was literally filling out forms, faxing it to a billing person. And,
wow.
I mean, I can even tell you
CMS, you were filling out the CMS 1500?
Yes, the HCFA forms, like the red with the yellow, and like it had like 3 copies. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about. I feel
days.
old, right? I feel old as soon as I said that. Like, remember carbon paper? Sorry. Some people are like, what's that? Google it, you'll find it. But more like it was like in triplicate, right? So you had to write, and God forbid if you wrote something wrong, you had to tear everything up and write it again. And the tedious nature. So that's kind of how I started working in mental health. And then it was like, we write down, like, we had a billing person. So we'd fax over a log every day. And that was great because somebody takes it off your plate. And so you're not having to fill out the forms. And then, the joys of technology moving things forward, you see all the online billing systems but you need someone to manage all that because it's like, hey, everyone at an organization, like I had a CAQH, you had a CA, everyone had their own CAQH login. So somebody has to collaborate and get all that information, keep it updated. Every time there's new liability insurance, they have to go in and enter it, or you have to, verify your new license and upload it online. And then it gets, again, credentialed maybe with Blue Cross Blue Shield because things are a little bit better, but like it used to be like, well, they wouldn't talk to each other. So you had to send CAQH some information. Then you said Blue Cross Blue Shield, their own credentialing information. And, it just, the time and the energy on top of seeing clients and, going through your billing logs to make sure that you're getting reimbursed, and it's coordinating with what you're like, okay, the client paid X amount of copay. this was what the 90837 reimbursement rate is, and you got to put those two numbers together to make sure that the total amount being paid after your split is accurate.
Right.
And all of that is to say, like, nobody teaches you how to do this. And so it's a lot of like everyone figuring out their own systems. And I think that in some way helped prepare me for where I am today as doing my own practice, because I was writing and managing my own billing logs. Not that I don't trust the large organization, but if you don't manage it, well, then who will, right? It's like if you don't balance your, back in the day, you don't balance your checkbook, then people don't have checkbooks anymore. But like if, you don't do that, theoretically, right?
Yeah.
I make these references, I was like, oh, like, it's like a tape. And somebody was like, what's a tape? And I was like,
right,
oh,
right. What year were you born? I'm the tail end of Gen X.
I'm 76.
Okay, so you're just a few years ahead of me. Yeah.
There are these moments where I date myself with my little references. But anyway, so you see how technology can really help streamline a lot of these things. But when, let's say, you don't have reliable Wi-Fi in the office because the organization it's an old building, and the organization hasn't built like the Wi-Fi boosters. And so, or you have laptops that are getting compromised because they're being used for a lot of different reasons. And so they're not necessarily HIPAA secure, or, there's lots of these things where they get lost in the shuffle. And so it all kind of delays payment. It delays credentialing. It delays all of those organizational dynamics that Urban Balance took care of for years, that now ultimately it's up to me to be on top of.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I would love to pull the thread on a little bit more. And I can already tell, like, you're very solid. You got a good head on your shoulders. But was there any fear on your end as an employee not having any control of this plane that was flying while being built?
Oh, yeah. Because it's hard to trust when you know that you're not being shown all the cards. That it's like, well, are we going to have to do pre-therapy measures and post-therapy measures for every client because the organization is requiring it rather than you think it's clinically appropriate? Like, like, hey, we're going to have to do the Beck depression inventory,
right?
Or like, PAQH, the mental health inventories. Are you going to have to be like doing that because, let's say, refresh is required, because ultimately they're trying to collect data so then they can show to different employers that look,
they're investors. That's who they want to show that fucking data to.
Yes, because they want to show the value of therapy.
Exactly.
And how do we quantify it? Oh yeah. No, it starts to get bizarre when you read like that, like some organizations and these, there's like the mental health platforms that people use. Sometimes there's suits against, is it AI? Are they listening in on the session? Are they going to give you an empathy quotient that is going to elevate you to get more referrals versus an empathy quotient that's lower? Because it's all being monitored and taken in with the insurance company. They'll listen to like on the different keywords that you're using. And so it's really commodifying therapy, because how do we make it short and consistent? And they'll say like, hey, we'll give you X amount of dollars for Y amount of session, and that's it. Rather than, fee for service, it's kind of this bundling format. Like, we will bundle X amount of sessions because this is the diagnosis. And so this is how long it should take you. And all of that's being taken out of the clinician's hands. And that's kind of, I think, unfortunately, that's where the venture capitalist influx starts to take it is, it's not just like shrinkflation. It's really poor quality mental health care that is ultimately going to, insurance doesn't cost less, it costs more. So everyone's paying more for insurance and we're getting less. And provider reimbursement rates haven't gone up either. And so all of these kind of variables, if we don't self-educate, then it's kind of just like, well, what happened? You get lost in the dust.
Right, right. And I predict, this is not something I want to come true, but my prediction is that there is going to be a backlash against therapists because of this watering down of therapy and trying to commodify it and make it these bite-sized things that people are getting bad therapy. And we're already seeing, one of the things that I've seen happen lately is people recording their therapy sessions and then putting them on TikTok as a complaint of how the therapist is, acting. And that, that's wrong on so many levels, but also it's a good wake-up call for therapists. Like, you've got to, my shtick is always, you got to do your own work, because if you're not doing your own work, you don't know how to show up in that room.
Right.
And experience and all that other stuff. But so kind of coming back to like, what the practice owners can take away from this is, I don't know that there's an answer to this question, Aaron, because what's come up in other conversations about what it feels like to be the employee is, the building the plane while flying it is a criticism, right? It's kind of come up in that way. And yet I don't know if we can do it differently. I think what practice owners could do is be more mindful of why they're going into it and think about how to build some infrastructure before they do it. I think that that's possible. But I do think that entrepreneurship in and of itself is just that, is building the plane while flying it. And so I wonder if, and I think that this is part of what we're seeing right now in the issue between practice owners and employees, is employees may have this expectation that they're going into a fully formed business that has everything fleshed out. They've got their shit together, their policies and procedures, their organizational management, right? And that's not how private practice is. And so I want new clinicians to recognize that you cannot say, oh, I'm going into private practice and have any expectations that it's going to be the same thing organizationally as any other place you go, because every owner does it different. And that's not a bad thing necessarily, but it's higher risk for both the owner and for the employee. And if the employee doesn't think about that going into it, their risk tolerance level, they're just going to be filled with anxiety all the time.
Right. Because there's a customer service component in all this as well, like how we're managing clients, how you're marketing, and the revenue stream. Our clients aren't coming in the door. Well, then, obviously you're not getting paid. And so I think a lot of clinicians are used to like a W-2. So like, okay, I'm going to be paid a flat fee or,
Right.
flat, a salary.
Right.
And part of that adjustment of like, no, this fee for service model. So if clients don't show up, you don't get paid if you're not marketing yourself. And I find that's also what is beneficial when you work outside of private practice. It helps you build your brand.
Yeah.
Like what's going to differentiate you as a clinician from the other practices? As a practice, what's going to differentiate you in your staff? Because we can all say anxiety, depression, mood disorders, things like that. But is it your approach? Is it your style? Is it your education? What are the things that are going to differentiate you in a marketplace? And I think that happens on an individual level, but also an organizational level. And that's also what pulls people into your practice as staff, is they want to be part of that brand and they take that brand with them going forward.
Right, right. And, I've seen different practices do it differently in terms of marketing. Like some practices say, I'm going to do all the marketing and I'm going to bring in all the clients for you. And I think that only works to a certain level because of what you're saying is like, if somebody is coming in and has a relationship with the individual clinician, that's going to build that clinician's reputation as well, and then potentially get more referrals from that. And I keep telling people who are building their private practices, your number one referral source is not Psychology Today and just out there in the world. It's other therapists. And so if you are not networking and creating relationships, no matter where you work, you're going to shoot yourself in the foot if you really want to be in private practice one day.
Right. And again, I think that's like working in a hospital. It's like, okay, people are getting discharged to a lower level of care. So like I have some of those like social work friends who are like working in the hospital and they're coordinating discharge. And they're like, hey, this person is having conflict in this marriage. Well, Aaron does a lot of work with marital conflict and he's a Gottman background and he works with anger. Great. And therein lies having those relationships because it's also, they want to find people you trust. And that's kind of the intangible here. I always say there's lots of restaurants there, but like I can go and say it's good food, good service. Somebody else goes to the same restaurant. They have a terrible experience because it's about taste. And, God forbid you break your leg, everybody gets a cast. If you're worried, you're having panic, there's so many ways to approach it. And so organizations want to have these reliable agencies, providers that they can refer to that like, hey, we know that they're going to prepare it in a high quality way. And again, there's nothing wrong with interns and provisionally licensed staff, but it's matching the client with the right kind of provider. And that's not always going to be the best fit.
Yes. And this is the other thing that kills me, that I believe the best way that you can start client retention off on the right foot is having a contact call with the client before the first session. Because you can weed things out immediately, right? Like if somebody comes to me and they're like, I want cognitive behavioral therapy, I'm like, that's not what I do. You want to go to my friend Sarah Suzuki, right? Like, well, sorry, she'd probably shoot me in the face for saying that, but she does behavioral work. I'm more of the like psychodynamic, deeper stuff, somatic things. So, and you can weed that out in the phone call because the client, I say this with love and respect. The clients don't know what the modalities are. They hear a thing. It's just like the fucking prescription, commercials. It's like somebody goes and they're like, I need Prestique. Why do you think you need Prestique? Because you saw a commercial about it? Like, why do you think you need EMDR? Just because your friend got EMDR and it was helpful? Like, I want clients to advocate for themselves, but they don't know the modalities. That's what we get paid for, to help sort out with them, not for them, but with them, what is most appropriate. And when practices are foregoing that initial contact with client and therapist, I think they're missing a big, big part of it.
1,000%. I mean, it's, there's that duality. We're in a caregiving fee taking role.
Hmm.
And so, I've seen some colleagues be like, well, hey, this is just kind of customers coming in the door. And so I can build to suit and I will tailor. And or organizations even like, hey, you don't really work with couples, but like, here's a couple that's going to be on your caseload. It's like, well, that's not good for the clinician or for the client.
Exactly.
And there's space to
It's
grow.
efficient for you as a practice, but is it really helping the client or the therapist? Yes.
And again, organizational brand, that person
Mhm.
word of mouth. I find that's the best marketing is like
Yep.
clients word of mouth, colleagues word of mouth. And when somebody has a bad experience, that's where it goes online. People don't tend to put the good experiences online. And again, the brand and the marketing and how that promotes what kind of clinical, I won't say service, but the kind of,
Yeah.
clinical skills you're providing, the kind of like foundation, because this is fits and starts. It's not like, okay, well, I feel great every session.
Right.
There's going to be some sessions where you do have to push back and the client is going to feel a little bit more down or a little bit more anxious. But I always say, like, that's the work.
That's
Like,
the work.
you go to the gym and you stand on the treadmill, you got to turn it on. Otherwise, you're just it's like, I'm at therapy, but I'm like, well, you're not really doing the work though. Like, and that sometimes means it doesn't always feel good, or we get defensive, or like people get emotional, like, and it all starts to like feel exhausting. I was like, yeah, you're bench pressing 40 pounds, right? Like, feels good, but it's also tiring. And I think that's creating those expectations with newer clients and also with newer clinicians.
Yes.
It's not just like, hey, how do we fix it? And I find a
Yes.
lot of younger clinicians are in that, and
Yes.
that's that venture capitalist, like, we need to fix these clients, get them in, get them out. And it's like, well, that's like, you out of a cast and let's run a marathon. It's like, well, you need to strengthen your leg. It atrophied over
Yes.
time.
Yeah.
And so, like, it's that strengthening of the clinicians and the organization that I think is not always going to, well, I see it like it's kind of getting weaker. And people aren't getting stronger because they're trying to go from grad school right to working. And I
Yeah.
think therein lies the experience of, again, it doesn't have to be my path, but I think
Right.
there has to be some diversity. Even it's like, that wonderful window of time we all had to go through, that post-graduation, pre-independent licensure. It's like, well, that's a time to work with things that are going to make you uncomfortable. That's a time to work with, maybe that's not like my concentration, but like that's the time to experience and explore because the stakes are low. You're an intern, you're provisionally licensed. You're going to get supervision. Someone's going to be there to walk you through all the
Someone's
challenges.
holding you.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. One of the reasons that I specifically wanted you here was to talk about like what you learned in or what prepared you to be on your own that you got from a group practice. Is there anything that you were like, oh shit, I didn't realize I was going to have to take care of that on my own? Or was there any sort of like different feeling sense that you had when it was just you and you were the only one that could like make the changes?
Yeah, I think, the whole rise of teletherapy makes this of such a different dynamic to go out on your own because I don't need to rent office space and get furniture and deal with, different kinds of insurance for that office space. And so the overhead drops. And so those things created a space. But then, I guess what I forgot was just that the collegial nature, the camaraderie, somebody to process
Yeah.
with, like it's nice when you can just go down the hall or meet in the kitchen and you can just kind of connect with people. And, I love doing supervision with like, provisionally licensed or intern level staff because you get that didactic, you get that back and forth, you get to have that
Yeah.
energy, you're again, that isolation. It's great to be on your own, but it's also that isolating component. I think there's also, as far as, how do you market your brand? What does that mean for you? I've been fortunate in the sense of, I've worked jobs where I'm in a cubicle in a call center. And so when there's no calls, well, what do you do? Like, and this, what I would work on a blog because that's what everybody did in the early 2000s. They had a blog. And so I worked on a blog and then I had a website say like, hey, we'd really like you to write for our website. I was like, great. And so then I started being paid to like blog pretty much. And then I found a publisher and they're like, hey, we like to turn your blog post into a book. And I was like,
That's
great.
how you do
And so
it.
I guess I share this because like you never know how these
Mhm.
little things are going to play out. And I don't think that's something that, you can appreciate until you're on your own. Because it's like, well, I don't have to make those efforts because they'll market for me. They'll bring I never, my wife jokes, she's like, when did I marry the angry therapist? Like, I'm a therapist who works with anger management because anger to me is like very tangible and you can see it. But like, it's one of those things that you think you know what you're going to do when you're in grad school. I thought I was going
Right.
to work with grief. And from the experiences I got, I was like, oh, grief is so sad. And of course, Of course it is,
Oh, I
Erin.
didn't think about that.
Right. I was like every day, all day. It's like, oh my God, those hospice workers, I salute you. The bereavement counselors,
Yeah.
I tip my hat to you. That's a lot every day. And that's what I mean. Like we have different skills and different abilities. And a lot of people say, I don't want to work with anger. I'm like, oh, I love anger. Like, give me an angry client because they care. They care enough to be pissed. And so I guess I'm saying all this to get to the point of you don't know until you get the experiences. And so I think the opportunity to have experiences to learn about how to market yourself, what you're going to focus on, your concentration is, it's not just like to the theoretical component, because a lot of clients, to your point, don't really care about, they don't care, but they're not really aware of the theoretical component, but like
Right.
the presenting issue. And that is where you're going to learn from your colleagues. You're going to learn from just the experience and like, okay, what differentiates me is there's not anger management in Chicago. There was a very few providers working with that. And I was like, well, hey, there's a market there.
Right.
And, just the inherent traits of being cisgendered white male, like, okay, there's a lot of angry white men out there. Like, I can work
Yep.
with, there's a population
Yep.
and there's an underserved need, and I can be that person. And, it's amazing. You get guys like seven figures, you think like they got everything. No, they're really like really resentful for a whole host of, developmental trauma on and on.
Yep.
And so, like, that's where being open towards these kind of different professional experiences, I think that really helps you grow and being able to lean into like things that are uncomfortable. And that's what, again, stress management led me to anger management because my minds are two sides of the same coin. But a lot of people get very uncomfortable with anger. And so I find like that's challenging because you're on a customer service level. You're going to deal with clients who are angry because they get a large bill. You're going to deal with insurance networks that are angry because you haven't submitted your credentialing in time. So like there's that parallel process, I guess what I'm trying to speak to, not just working with clients, but
Yeah.
we can only go so far as we've gone ourselves. And so like if you're not comfortable doing those uncomfortable things like advocating for
Yep.
a one-time agreement with an insurance company that wants to work with you, or you want to raise your rate, or you want to say you have to push back on a client who hasn't paid their invoices.
Yep.
All of that is not something you're going to get from a book. It's going to come from the experience of doing it.
Absolutely. Well, to wrap up, I guess my final question is what advice do you have for practice owners who are listening right now?
I think not shielding your staff.
Mm.
Transparency, authenticity is essential because we're smart and staff, they want that relational kind of dynamic, which if
Mhm.
you try to make it a hierarchy where it's like, okay, do as you're told, then you're going to get very different kind of relationships and you're not going to get that loyalty. And ultimately, we want to build a community. And so I think like transparency and authenticity really does help people feel heard and seen and understood rather than just sharing part of it. And it's like, I remember conversations like, what can we do to help staff retention? It's like, okay, we can, get pens. It's like, yeah, pens aren't what help retain staff. That's not it. Like, it's like we get bagels. Like, yeah, people like bagels. Sure, go to the office, get bagels. But now everyone's, like, what do? We help with CEUs. We help with like a 401k. We help with like people feel valued because we're all trying to make. We're doing this for the. It sounds terrible. We're doing this for the money. If I always say, if I win
It's a
Powerball, I'm
job.
going to be on. Yeah,
Right.
like it's I win Powerball. I'm going to be at a beach. I'm not going to be doing that. Like I'll be doing something fun.
Right.
But I'm doing this because this is my skill set and I have to feel respected with my skills and abilities. And you could say that, verbalize that as a business owner, but people feel appreciated when they feel taken care of. And so you
Mhm.
take care of them with good insurance. You take care of them with benefits, 401k, disability, you pay their liability, you cover CEUs. There's an investment in your staff. And I know as a professional now doing my own business, tax deductible. A lot of those can be, mitigated through your own tax and accountant processes. And so these are all workable solutions to help create an organization that's cohesive and everybody feels appreciated.
And I'll just say to the practice owners listening who are like, I can't afford all that, then that's an important thing to recognize is that you can't necessarily expect a lot of loyalty from employees if you're not able to provide some of the basic things that a W-2 workplace should provide. And like there are barriers because you have to have an employee for a year before you can offer insurance. So there's
Mhm.
there's a lot of stuff to that I also want employees to know that it's not like, okay, snap my fingers and have it, but yes, what I'm hearing you say is really creating a community where it's very, very the care is demonstrated that you really care about the staff. And the way that I always looked at it is if I'm putting the client first, then that's going to trickle down to help the therapist, right? If I'm prioritizing the
Mhm.
therapeutic relationship, then that's the way I tried to build community. And sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't, but
And again, we're not necessarily in this industry because it's the most lucrative. We're in this industry because we want to help. We want to care. There's something about us as people that brought us to this field. And so there's opportunity, obviously, to make it lucrative. But there's, I think, that people first mindset rather than we're numbers
Right.
on a spreadsheet and looking at like, well, you have to have X amount of sessions this month. And Aaron, why haven't you seen X amount of clients? Because it's really just a numbers thing rather than a personal thing.
Right.
And making it relational, I think, is fundamental because I've seen those conversations go sideways pretty quick. And it becomes a challenge. Like, well, now we're having to like lay staff off or because they're not meeting the quota. And again, you can't always control those things, whether the clients are not showing up, whether the clients aren't coming in the door. And I think therein lies, if we have those relationships, we give people benefit of the doubt. We feel that trust. We feel supported.
Right.
So when you have those ups and downs, because, summer, suddenly it's great. Everyone feels good. Like my caseload gets smaller.
Yep.
And then it's back to school. And suddenly everyone's coming out through the woodwork. And you have to be able to prepare for those ebbs and flows just in the calendar, the year to year.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, where can people find you if they want to know more about you?
KarminCounseling.com. That's my website, and it also has information about my own blog currently, my books that are written, and they're also available on Amazon. I can plug away there. And if there's any questions, I can be reached at akarmin@KarminCounseling.com.
Amazing. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it.
I really appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks for listening to the special Burnt Out Practice Owner series. If you want more information about today's guest, go to our website at www.headheartbiztherapy.com/podcast. Thanks to the Creative Imposter Studios for editing, and I'm your host, Sarah Bueno. Until next time, bye-bye.